The following is a true story, the story of an innocent and happy childhood. It's a story of unspeakable horrors and a rebirth that has inspired thousands. A story of pain turned to hope. This is the story of Dr. Robert Fisch.
Budapest was a very lively city, and the people is always very lively, sometimes too lively. But it was, to me, very enjoyable. My father loved music, and we couldn't ever go anywhere when the gypsy didn't know him by first name. But he took me always to theater. So music was very important, and theater was also extremely important. I went with my father every weekend to some theater, and it was very popular in Hungary and still is. The life for me was very joyful, like most of the childhood memory. My parents worked very hard, and they wanted us to have a different kind of life. So they provided us everything possible to be educated, not only in knowledge of certain materials, but music as well.
For Robert Fisch, life has been extreme. From a happy childhood to the Holocaust, from freedom to communist rule, from personal despair to fulfillment as a doctor, an artist, and now a teacher. Budapest of the 1930s was also a progressive city, not only culturally, socially, and it was noted for its spacious central market directly across the street from the Fisch home. The Fisch family sold poultry from this market stall.
Life was very lively and pleasant, and it was, as far as I know, very little about some kind of uphill, what took place later, although it was some sign of it.
Fall 1944. Hungary soon found itself with a political commitment to the Nazi movement. Allegiance to the swastika spread, although most Hungarian Jews had little notion of the horror to come, often at the hands of their own countrymen.
Well, the Jews were restricted, but they were not in live danger. And until they started to have the war against Russians, and the young Jewish man who was the age and militarily was drafted, they went to working units, and they were very cruel with them, and many of them were killed. The people felt Hungarian. My father felt that he never wanted to leave the country. He was known there, and that was his country. I looked out the window with my father and said, well, they might never see each other. On the day when this happened with me, we were very keenly aware of that, but we didn't want to say goodbye. So we just kissed each other like we're going to see each other within a few hours, but we know the same thing is, unfortunately, that's the way it happened.
Robert was first assigned to work as a clerk in the Jewish Council. He and his fellow workers had no uniforms, only a distinct yellow star.
So sometimes in May, one day, a man came who was very excited. And meanwhile, of course, the Jews had to be at the yellow star. Many of them already had to go to a ghetto, so they have to leave their home, and they were crammed together in 5 family in one room. And one very excited man came, and he said he wanted to talk with the head of the division. I was so curious of his behavior, was so unusual, that I did not leave the room. I stayed at the door, and I was trying to listen what he had to say. And he described that in the country where he came from, in one day, after they were already separated in the so-called ghetto, without any further notice, one day they had to go to the railroad station, and they were crammed together in a cattle car, and they were locked in, and they were taken away. When I heard this is in the book, I said I heard the news, I trembled, I became speechless. When I heard it, the way how this is happening, I became aware they're going to kill us. And that really changed my whole attitude.
October 1944. 8 months till the war would end. The Russian army had almost surrounded Budapest, but the Hungarian Nazis acted quickly to move remaining Jews out of the country. These death marches resulted in thousands of deaths from exhaustion, hunger, or execution. Robert was now in a forced labor camp with 250 other men, women, and children.
At that time, not only we, the people who were in this working camp, but women, children, and others who were taken away from Budapest ghetto, actually. Hungarian Nazis, the Arrow Cross, took over the government.
Their destination was a concentration camp near Linz, Austria, a journey that would take 14 weeks and involve 400 miles.
We walked through the Alps, sometimes 4 or 5 days without any food or water, and anyone who was weak sit down and they shot them.
For only one short part of the rugged trip, the exhausted and hungry marchers were off their feet during a brief train trip.
And they asked us to get out from the train. And when the train stopped, we saw that parallel to the railroad, a little bit down, the railroad was on a hill, is a highway, and the Spitfires came down on the level of the trees, and they shot the German military cars. And I was so happy. You know, the plane was almost within our reach. I was jumping from joy, and because I just was thrilled. And then a German soldier saw me and started to beat me with his rifle until I collapsed. And you know, nobody thinks about anyone else in a situation like that. It is, you became an animalistic level. You just want to survive. I knew the end is coming, either for me and for them. And you just kept walking, that's all.
Mauthausen, once a prison camp, but by the time Robert Fisch arrived, it had become the third largest Nazi concentration camp. Over 125,000 were murdered here. Women, children, Americans, Germans, Hungarians, physicians, engineers, professors, musicians. Mauthausen existed because of its nearby rich rock quarry, wherein men hauled up 100-pound blocks of rock, or died trying.
We were filthy. Late evening when we arrived, everything was surrounded with barbed wires and searchlights. Our food was about a piece of spoiled bread. It was green, some little liquid, and no facility for latrine or toilet.
April 1945. Before camps like Mauthausen could be liberated, Robert and his fellow prisoners were marched through the woods to a smaller, isolated camp, Gunskirchen. May 5th, 1945. For the survivors of Gunskirchen, those that could still stand, the Yanks were a glorious sight. But for the American GIs, to come upon the tortured, emaciated souls from these camps was totally unexpected.
I was full with hatred. And when this was over, I had nothing in my mind except how I'm going to kill them. Until I came across with the first German who came to beg me for food. Now then, I have to make the most important decision. I'm going to do the same thing with them that most of them did with us. Then what's the difference? So I had to give him some food.
In that moment, Robert Fisch knew that love and hate are choices. This was a message he would eventually need to share with others. When finally he returned to Budapest and his home, he found that Anna, his childhood caretaker, had successfully hidden his mother. They soon learned that his father, Zoltán, had died at the Hungarian concentration camp, Hidagság.
And when he died, he was put in a separate grave. Before he died, he said, if people can do such a thing with each other, it's not worth to come back, and he didn't. And I gave him his favorite flower, and even that could not come between us.
Robert's caretaker, Anna Tatbroy, had always been able to guide him. She was there again when it was time for a career decision.
I wanted to be always an architect, but Anna, who raised me, said that I should be a doctor. When I was a little boy, they asked me, what do you want to be? And I was a very obedient, you couldn't believe it. I said, Anna said I will be a doctor. You know, that was not me. She said it.
Robert did go on to medical school in Budapest, but his avocation to save lives was soon quelled when Russian tanks, in the fall of 1956, attacked civilians in Budapest, and what seemed like a gallant Hungarian revolution was quickly put down. It was then that Dr. Robert Fisch made another major decision: to leave his beloved country and take his light from the yellow star to a newfound freedom in America.
We must always remain human toward everyone, no matter how brutal the circumstances, like the butterfly breaking through the light. For those of us who have freedom, we must guard it and extend it to those who are less fortunate.
The following is a true story, the story of an innocent and happy childhood. It's a story of unspeakable horrors and a rebirth that has inspired thousands. A story of pain turned to hope. This is the story of Dr. Robert Fisch.
At age 79, Robert Fisch is on a mission of human rights and human justice. That calling is clearly reflected in his artwork, which changed dramatically just a few years ago.
I think he had a period in his life that he sort of went through a revelation. He didn't discuss it with a lot of people. He went through a very difficult time within himself emotionally.
When Dr. Fisch approached the editor of the university's Minnesota Medicine magazine to do illustrations for the magazine's cover, he became faced with a challenge that would actually change the course of his life and his career.
She said, I have for you a project. And I said, what would you like me to do? She's about the Holocaust. And I really thought about Holocaust, not in the sense that I would do, but I always felt that this is such a heavy subject and it's so difficult that it would be maybe a Rembrandt or Beethoven or something. So I said to her that I don't think that I am qualified to do something of this nature, but I would like just to think about it.
I had seen the piece that he painted, his first piece for the cover of the magazine, and it was much more horrific and much more, just bizarre than what he usually does.
When she received it, she liked it, and she said, fine, but I would like now, because I heard that you were in the concentration camp, why don't you write an article? That was very, very difficult for me to do, because I really felt that I should express feeling here rather than a story. So I used a quotation from Memorial Cemetery, which is actually quotation from the Bible, and then I tried to make the stories between, and this Memorial Cemetery where next to my father is buried, so it was a very emotional thing for me to do. I was crying, really.
And after that experience, it seems like he sort of came to terms with his experiences.
I did the red and the black, and I put some wires in it. When I did that, I thought, so gee, that's okay, but this could be any camp. This could be a camp in Russia, it could be a camp in Yugoslavia, whatever. So that doesn't really, so then I did these little yellow things, which actually nothing more than the yellow star is flowing away because it's killed, it's gone, it's going away. So that was, to me, the illustration for the Holocaust.
That article and the artwork caught the attention of a school administrator in a rural Minnesota town.
This is why it's so beautiful. And if someone is killed, who can forgive for that? You understand?
He came and worked with both upper elementary and secondary students to tell his story. And it was beyond my expectations, the impact that it had on the students and our school in general.
I thought, so first of all, why Pan City? Why not something, let's say Chicago or Berlin or something bigger one? But then I went to Pan City, which was to me a milestone, a turning point in my life, because the first evening, it was a small group of parents, 7 parents only, And I talked to them in a library, and I was, among other things, was telling that how much I fled from the air raid, and when the Nazis occupied Hungary, then I recognized that the only way I survive if they lose the war sooner before they kill me. So that instead of being afraid, I was euphoric when a bomb was dropped on the city. I completely changed. And when I finished, this a gentleman stood up and he said, Dr. Fisch, I cannot tell you what it meant to me, your speech. And I said, why? He said, I was a bombardier over Budapest. And I always felt that I killed innocent people. And now I know it was another meaning. And I never told my family what I did during the war.
Dr. Fisch left Pine City that night with a clear understanding that his story, his art, and the courage to make the right choices needed to be taken to young people.
It was actually very painful to me to do this, but gave me emotional satisfaction that the young people responding beautifully to that. That's to me the relief. That I find this even much more satisfactory than the medicine, which I did, because I am now have an impact when I go to a class, maybe 12 kids, maybe 1,000 the most. You have an impact on young people's life, and I want them to learn something from this experience, and learning something good from a bad experience, and I think that's to me the satisfactory thing to do. Come next to me. I mean,
While most of us focus on a chosen profession, Dr. Fisch, the pediatrician, began to apply his talents in a second career as artist, writer, and guest lecturer.
But I felt that a wider audience deserved to hear his story, and particularly when I also learned of his artwork.
In Budapest, after I could not go to the university, I took some classes in an art school in the evening, and then when I came to United States and I finished my pediatric training here at the university, immediately I went to the Minneapolis College of Art for 9 years to take evening classes, so I always was interested to paint.
He painted very beautiful, happy things, lots of flowers, lots of color. Everything was just a very pure green, yellow, red, blue, pink, lots and lots of color, big, very abstract shapes.
I always like actually beautiful things, so I like flowers and so forth. So I always thought the color is the alphabet of joy.
And I was, maybe 5, 6 years old, and I wanted to paint too. So he used to outline, and I used to paint in his outline of all of, these things. And that was a lot of fun. But we had a great time painting and listening to music downstairs on the weekends.
Thank you very much.
Not only did I think he should write a book, I felt that he should illustrate the book and be able to use this in telling about his experiences in schools. And I think my husband got a little tired of hearing about this, and he finally said, please call Dr. Fisch and tell him about this. He said, I don't want to hear any more about it. And I was just a little nervous about calling him, but I worked up my courage and told him what I thought, and he took it from there.
The next bell will probably...
I think that the wonderful thing about his presentation is his artwork.
He can only say so many words to express how he feels about the experience, and the art is just another way to show how he feels, maybe a more deep way and a more creative way to get his point across. And I think that we all do that every day in the creative things that we do. Words only say so much.
I feel the same way today about him.
Not only is art open to interpretation, art requires personal interpretation. So by sharing his art with us, his emotion, it requires us to find our own emotion.
For Dr. Robert Fisch, the journey to the small town of Pine City was the reawakening of a painful history. But as his light from the yellow star began to impact the lives of young people, even some that he had treated as a pediatrician, that pain turned to hope and a belief that the Holocaust still carried a message of love.
These words are their flowers. They were killed by the hatred. Their memory is kept alive in love. Again, with the book and the illustration, nothing more I want is just a feeling. And again, the story of mine is not important because the story, the real stories will be never told because those people didn't survive. So whoever say I'm a survivor, I was there or something, is never going to be able to tell the way how it really was because those cannot come. Those who really went through everything never able to tell the story.
He told me not to emphasize the concept of survivor in my introduction. And I said, fine, I won't say that, but I said, what do you mean by that? Explain to me what you mean. And he replied to me that we are all, as human beings, survivors of something. And the fact that you survive it is not enough. What he wants to get across to students and the rest of us is that it's where you go from there after you survive it. What are you going to learn from your feelings and experiences and carry on to the rest of your life?
The following is a true story, the story of an innocent and happy childhood. It's a story of unspeakable horrors and a rebirth that has inspired thousands, a story of pain turned to hope. This is the story of Dr. Robert Fisch.
To visit more.
What?
You have to visit more.
I will.
Dr. Robert Fisch left his beloved Budapest and moved to Minneapolis in 1956 to begin a new life. He specialized in pediatrics and has become known worldwide for his work in PKU, a rare disease that arises from the lack of a single enzyme.
It causes neurological damage if not treated and mental retardation, but treated you can have a normal child. So come down and see me and we'll take care of your baby.
When Madeline Bickle was born, she was diagnosed with PKU. The family pediatrician sent Madeline and her parents to Robert Fisch.
He came across initially kind of as a mad scientist to me. When he walked in and he said, "I am Dr. Fisch," and he drew a fish on the drawing board, I thought, well, he also has a sense of humor.
Madeline is now 13, and with a special diet and the guidance of Dr. Fisch, she not only leads a normal life, but is an avid writer. While she's known Dr. Fisch her whole life, his appearance at her school was particularly special.
And he came to the classroom and just talked about his experience and not to judge people by their first appearance or how they look or how they're different. He also talked about the pictures in his book and what they mean to him and what they should mean to other people or mean to other people. And just a lot of good lessons from his experience.
Dr. Robert Fisch still maintains his pediatric practice at the University of Minnesota, and he continues to draw and paint and produce books of his art and his experience.
What can I learn from it? And it was to me much more important to tell about the few people who were helpful, who was human even in the inhuman circumstances, than who was brutal. Of course it was a horrible place, that's not the issue. But I think that what we can learn from it, we can learn from it how to hate someone else just because happen to be Mohammedan or Jewish or Buddhist or Christian. That's not my purpose. Okay, so
but the work that is now
why
his passion is in the classroom, bringing his story of tolerance and personal responsibility to young people whenever and wherever he can.
He just wanted to get on with his life and try to make something good come out of it, which is sharing this with us and his book that he wrote.
A thing that grabbed them is that he went through this whole episode when he was 19, and they're not, some of those kids sitting in the Holocaust class are 18. So they're close, and they're thinking back, boy, just think, here's a guy that went through this. He's almost the same age as us.
Having worked in pediatrics for more than 50 years, Dr. Robert Fisch understands young people.
It would be very easy to say that we, Hungarians, whatever, Americans, Jews, we are better people than others. And that's the problem. We are not. So what I think is one of the most important as far as I'm concerned, that I don't judge a person that is born in Hungary, or because a physician, or because has a good income, or because whatever. I appreciate for the person the way they are.
When he talks with them, he always wants to drive home a critical point about tolerance. This message of tolerance is being heard, not only by American students, but in Europe as well.
You have very much more similarities than differences. And that what I mean is that biologically, the law, the way how we function inside of us, as well as the outside, is impact all of us the same way. The same with the Catholic versus the Jewish and Mohammedan. But it doesn't matter. Every religion actually has one thing in common. They talk about love. What we do with it is another issue.
Dr. Fisch has a routine that he follows in most classes. An introduction, a series of slides using the images he's painted that are in his book. But it's the student questions, often unpredictable, that really get his attention.
And I said, he's here. He's the one who can answer those questions for you. So they were ready. And I was so pleased to see my kids sitting with their notebooks right in front of them, ready to ask questions.
Earlier you were talking about you had a hard time forgiving the person that killed your father. Well, my dad's father was also murdered for no reason. And so in Guyana. And so what I want to ask you, do you want to forgive that person?
I don't think there's any religion ever say you have to kill. But if these guys who did this believe that God is forgive them, I think they have a very distorted idea of what God's supposed to be.
And one of our many freedoms is freedom of speech. And earlier last week I got a flyer saying from the National Socialist Movement about how the Jews are corrupting our politics. And there's a very fine line nowadays about how what's politically correct and what's not. And where do you think that line is with a letter like that?
I think that freedom has a price to pay. And I cannot stop you to tell what you think is right or wrong. I think that you should have the right to say whatever you think. Many people says that the Holocaust didn't exist. Now, some people make a big fuss about it. I have a very simple 3 explanation. 1, people are very stupid. Let's just say. For example, some people said the world is flat. There are still people think the world is flat. So what the hell I can do about it? Second, I told you that the Americans who liberated us, said, I don't believe it. How is it possible? Because it's impossible humanly to imagine that one single day in Auschwitz, 30,000 Hungarian children, women, and old men were gassed and killed and burned. One single day. In other words, it's really not a naivety, it's a humanly incomprehensible thing to believe it. The third thing, they are malicious people. For them, it doesn't matter what you're going to say.
Teachers talk to students a lot about making choices. Dr. Fisch really shows how important it is to make the right choices. I think that message comes through, that they are presented with situations every day where they have to make the right choice, and they see the consequences or the rewards of that through his presentation.
When you went back to your home in Hungary after the camps, and the communists were soon suppressing the people, how did you develop your philosophy that focused on love over hate?
It just had to be a conscious decision, but it was gradual, not sudden, and I had to keep working at it. And with that approach, I could even learn to make fun of the communists and their narrow approach to life. You just have to choose. That's it.
The light from the Yellow Star book, the art within the book, this is critical for our students to understand.
In your book, you use the colors black and red a lot. Do they have any special meaning?
I never did paintings like this. I like flowers. You saw those, with the butterfly and the flowers. That's the kind of painting I like to do, something happy. But I wanted to do something which is expressing the feeling, what the quotation, for example, here, you say that dead rushed through our window. So I tried to make something like a window, which is broken. What is this broken window mean? That it was a so-called an evening when the Nazis started to break all the windows and the synagogue, and they started to burn down. It's this evening, I wanted to have that symbol. So what I wanted to do is to make something similar, like the quotation. I never did anything like this in my life. And so it sounds very almost phony, like I didn't even do it. I was working very hard as a physician at the university, about 70, 80 hours a week. And when I was talking with the parents or children, seeing or dreaming, I was thinking about how I can make something, and it gradually came back. But I wanted to make it very dark and red and black, because this is not a happy kind of thing, so that this would be the suffering and the sorrow. That would be the expression of the pain.
My tears continue to fall for the fate of my people, for all who could not shed tears of their own. Where are the flaming stars? As many as the stars in the heaven, you promised. The promise has been kept. We are the stars in the heaven, the flaming, burning, ashen stars.
I think the beauty of what Dr. Fisch has done is that he's truthful with students and doesn't give superficial responses. He is willing to take the time to go into depth and really explore the topic, rather than give a response that isn't going to be so credible to students' experiences. And by doing that, he gives them what it takes for them to go on and learn and apply it in their own behavior.
There's no difference between you and a German student in 1935. Don't do what your professor telling you. Don't do what your government telling you. Do what your consciousness let you to do. And if they tell you this is okay and you don't feel it's okay, stand up and fight against it, because eventually you became a part of a system which you hate.
The following is a true story, the story of an innocent and happy childhood. It's a story of unspeakable horrors and a rebirth that has inspired thousands. A story of pain turned to hope. This is the story of Dr. Robert Fisch.
I ask my students, how do you think we can stop discrimination or prejudice in our world? And they usually come back to that picture and say, I have to start with myself first before I can think about, changing the rest of the world. I have to start with myself.
The central message of Dr. Fisch's book, Light from the Yellow Star, is enlightening for students and teachers who struggle with intolerance and injustice. Through his art and his words, Dr. Fisch takes his Holocaust experiences and focuses on beauty created by human virtue. While his interactions with kids are filled with stories of loss and inhumanity, the lesson is to always learn about compassion and understanding and love.
The kids have seen the actual footage, the memory of the camps, and they've seen Schindler's List, and they've seen some of these Holocaust documentaries, and so much of that, which it's appropriate, and they should see it, and I use it, but it's all the horrors of the Holocaust. So here is this person that comes out, and yes, presents his story. He has a message about love and hope, and he also asks some tough questions for them to think about, some philosophical questions. Okay, if you were in this family's shoes and this Russian soldier knocks on the door, are you going to take him in? Or think about it, if you went through the Holocaust, would you hate Germans?
That even in the worst circumstances, it's not a bad thing what we're going to remember, but the people who sacrificed their own life and tried to save us.
I think he challenges them and says, hey, you're as equal as I am. Think about this. I've thought about these questions all of my life since I've gone through this.
I think that the Holocaust could happen again. I think it does in small ways still today all over the world. People being looked down upon because of their religion, race, etc., all that. And people being forced to move out of their country and everything. So I think it still happens today. And I think that I think that's what the whole point of this is, so it doesn't happen again, and talk to people. And I think that if everyone hears Dr. Fisch's message, that maybe to start to stop it from happening.
What you really understand, the number one, the person who loves you, the person who you love, that person is really meaningful. You cannot multiply your joy, your sorrow, your feelings in a mathematical term.
The book, Light from the Yellow Star, sets the tone for Dr. Fisch's message. It points out that this is not the ugliness of hate, but the beauty of love that survives through time. The students are able to relate to the 19-year-old Robert Fisch and the trials he endured at that age.
I told Dr. Fisch this morning, I walked in the building and 3 of my boys came running up to me, my 9th grade boys. Mrs. Herman, that was so cool yesterday. I didn't think it was going to be like that. And I'll tell you honestly, I was worried about those boys. Those were the boys that I thought, oh, maybe they should just be gone that day. And for them to come up and not only have really heard and understood, but to seek me out to say, that was just so wonderful. Thank you for that opportunity. I know I touched them. I know that Dr. Fisch, this memory will stay with them forever.
It's a humanly incomprehensible thing.
The closet in Dr. Fisch's office is filled with boxes of letters. Letters written by students he's touched with his message of tolerance and love. He reads them all, and he saves every one.
Not a shield, but a hand. It should be a hand for the others who is not in my.
Dear Dr. Fisch, you have such an important message for the world to hear. That is the only way to prevent a genocide from happening again.
I think it's so great that your mission is to not just tell your story, but tell people how to just act humane and love one another.
You painted with a lot of black, and I think that was your fear.
Our world is so chaotic and can be really inhumane, but we need to be just and find ways to help others.
You used a lot of red, and I feel that brought out your anger.
I think that it is very admirable of you to see the positive outcomes of the Holocaust despite the difficult events you experienced.
I think they see themselves as a part of a larger community and start to compare what their lives have been compared to others, whether it's students sitting next to them or other stories of the Holocaust.
I heard him speak 3 years ago. It was a long time ago, but I still remember. I can still talk about it. I mean, that 1 hour that he came in and spoke to my class has been something that's stayed with me, and I know that I've shared it with other people. I mean, and it goes on and on and on.
And actually, I was participating in the revolution in Hungary, and we saved a lot of Russians and many other people who were injured, regardless what was their background, because as a physician, I cannot judge that what is your political or religious background. So what happened with me, I was lost, because I lost my base, the way how I was. But then eventually I came to the conclusion that's the only way I can live. So I have to be the same way I was before this all happened. But I'm doing it for different reasons.
He was 19, and they're close to that age. I think they wonder a lot what he did and how did he do it? How did he make it through? And they ask themselves, what strengths do I have that I maybe am not aware of?
But what Dr. Fisch taught each of us is we each need to stop it. We each need to stop the ignorance. We each need to find our humanity, the love within us, and begin with ourselves. And if we can begin with ourselves, then just like he has inspired each of us to find that within ourselves, we can continue to pass that along. But you can't just point fingers and say you need to change. That's a vicious cycle. You need to start with yourself. And he's enabled each of us to start with ourselves, which I think is the only way to prevent it from happening again.
the